Mr. Malinowski, your testimony discusses specific examples of how transit agencies in Houston, Los Angeles, Dallas, Jacksonville, for example, would cope with cuts in federal funding that could result from an insolvent transit fund. And they include massive service cuts, rolling back paratransit, fare increases. Can you discuss what impacts an insolvent trust fund might have on the large transit systems in the Northeast, for example?
Yes, Senator Menendez. It is critical to the economic viability of this country that we have good transportation networks. You look at the Northeast, how critical it is when we had Hurricane Sandy and people couldn't get to work, the impact that had on our economy. Whether it's in big systems or small systems, it is critical that people have access to jobs, access to health care, access to their communities. If they can't get there, they can't go there. So we must make these investments. Otherwise, we're going to see cuts in investment in capital, in operating, and access to jobs, access to health care, and we're going to slow this country's economic recovery down. It is critical that we make these investments.
Mm-hmm. You know, in our own systems that we operate, mass transit systems have also been the fueler of economic development, where we have seen transit systems ultimately be developed. For example, along the Hudson waterfront overlooking Midtown Manhattan, the Hudson-Bergen light rail system. Working years to help develop that, ultimately created an entire development of the waterfront that increased the rateable base for communities, increased jobs for individuals, and ultimately created even a greater synergy in Trans-Hudson crossings by getting people to those Trans-Hudson crossings through a mass transit system. And so, you know, I sometimes think we look at transit just about moving people from one place to the other. There's an economic dimension, there's a quality of life dimension, there's an environmental dimension in terms of breathing cleaner air. And so when I look at that, I am concerned about an insolvent trust fund, and I agree with my colleague, Senator Warren, that, you know, the patch-up system that we have of trying to fund this process makes for poor public policy, makes for poor planning decisions, and makes for a poor transit system at the end of the day. I also want to ask you about, I referred to it in my opening comments, about DOT's recently released conditions and performance report that shows that it will take $87 billion to simply bring our transit system to a state of good repair. Now, that doesn't mean to enhance it, it just means to bring it to a state of good repair. And that backlog is largely driven by the cost of repairing the tracks, the stations, the power systems that make up the backbone of our rail transit system. Does your organization's reauthorization proposal address this backlog and make sure that we're investing in the substantial capital needs?
Yes, it does, Senator. It is critical to make these investments to maintain safe, reliable, dependable service to these communities. Safety is paramount to these agencies, and we have to have a good investment in rail bed, in the locomotives, in buses, in the facilities they service. That investment is critical. And if we tie to the economic comments that you made, we had two studies recently done with one was done with National Association of Realtors, and one with the U.S. Travel Association. Housing stock along high-frequency transit corridors was 42% more resilient since the economic downturn, because people had access to jobs and to get around their community without automobiles. And the U.S. Travel Association found that downtowns had higher economic viability, higher room rates if they had a connection to their downtown and their airport through good transit. It's good for the economy overall. It's more than just about the trip from A to B.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that if you can't have the very guts of the system be in a state that can actually make billions of riders, rider trips, particularly in places like the Northeast, but other places in the country, then you can't achieve the type of transit system that creates that economic engine. Finally, President Hanley, I appreciate your leadership and your organization and your insights. Your testimony notes that between 1998 and 2009, private contracting, for example, for regular bus service doubled. And I know we hear this move towards privatization in an attempt to save money, yet privatization often has hidden costs that don't surface when the switch is made. You propose a new method of calculating these hidden costs, which you call the avoidable cost model. Can you explain how that model would work and how it would help transit agencies in making some sound investment decisions?
Well, First of all, the best way I can explain what's happened in terms of the starvation of our systems, including the privatization of them, is to take you into a meeting I was at with 25 of our local presidents, brand-new presidents who had just gotten elected in various parts of the union. And one of them stood up in the course of a discussion we had, and he said, you know, and he's from Dayton, Ohio, and he said, you know, I have members who work full-time, they've been there for 10 years, and they make $12 an hour, and they qualify for social services. And that got my attention. And I said, well, wait a minute, you know, how could that be? And I said, well, how many people in this room have that same issue, where you have members who are driving buses, fixing buses, working full-time, but qualify for social services? Every one of them in the room raised their hands except for the Canadians. That's what happened. And I was stunned, you know, that in our industry, because, you know, often in the larger cities, we think of transit workers as being decently paid. But the fact of the matter is, you know, as has been pointed out this morning, most of them are not. And most of them are out there living on very low wages. And the effect, the impact, and the secondary costs of privatization include stripping Americans of their pensions. I just want to point out that one of the largest companies that does this in America is a French-based company named Veolia that is owned by the French Social Security system. And they have a policy in the United States that no worker who works in their transit systems will have a pension. And in fact, no workers who work for Veolia in the U.S. have a pension. And that has long-term implications on our people. It has long-term implications on our country. And frankly, you know, we have to have priorities. I want you to know first that in 75% of the cases where the American people, taxpayers, are given the opportunity to vote to raise their own taxes for transit in referenda, they say yes. 75% of these referenda are passing. The American people are very willing to raise their taxes to pay for a transit system that they know helps the environment and helps the economy, as you pointed out, Senator. But the fact of the matter is that we have different priorities nationally, and we ought to rethink them, in addition to which, as Senator Warren said, I think we have to be, or I paraphrase, less timid about going to the American people and talking to them about revenue, because they're willing to pay for it. They just need to know what they're paying for. And some of the priorities we have, such as our huge war machine, I think really need to be questioned. And I know that's not a popular thing to talk about or to say, but the fact of the matter is that the amount of money we spend all over the world defending the American way of life while we diminish the American way of life every single day it really raises the question, what are we defending? If we can't defend our Social Security system, if we can't defend our pensions, if we can't defend these people who work in every transit system in America who also qualify for social services, what are we defending? I'm at a loss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.